Okay, let's dive right in. What if the story you've been told about um, a life without children, the one ending in loneliness, being forgotten, what if that's actually, well, a kind of carefully constructed cage?
A cage. How so?
Like a way to keep society's gears turning in a specific direction. Because let's face it, that narrative,
Mm.
it hits women hardest, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to resonate more pointedly with women, yeah, that expectation.
Okay, picture this. You're 70, celebrating.
Yeah.
Scenario A, house bursting with grandkids, wrapping paper everywhere. It's loud, chaotic, but full of love, right?
Okay, I can picture that.
Scenario B, cozy dinner, maybe just a few really close friends. You're sharing stories, adventures. There's this quiet hum of, I don't know, accomplishment in the air.
Two very different scenes.
Very different. Now, be honest with yourself, listening. Which one feels like you'd be betraying the woman you were supposed to become?
That's the interesting part, that feeling of betrayal.
Yeah. Where does that even come from?
Well, it touches on that internal conflict you mentioned before, doesn't it? Like seeing an exhausted mother and feeling maybe a flicker of relief.
Oh, absolutely. And
Um,
then immediately feeling awful about it, like total shame.
exactly. That shame speaks volumes about the narratives we've just absorbed, almost without noticing.
Mm.
We're just bombarded with these images of motherhood as the ultimate fulfillment. So if you feel anything other than pure yearning for that,
It feels wrong, dissonant.
right, it really makes you question how authentic those dominant stories are, doesn't it?
It does. And it's weird because, we talk so much about choice. A woman's right to choose, control her own body, her destiny.
We champion that.
We do,
Hmm.
until she chooses not to have kids.
Mm.
Then suddenly it's like her choices are everyone's business. Why? Why is that specific such a threat almost?
I think if you look at the bigger picture, it connects to those deep-seated societal expectations of a woman's role.
The traditional role.
Yeah, traditionally, historically, and you could argue still today, in many ways, a woman's value was or is kind of tied up with her fertility, her ability to reproduce.
So choosing not to.
It can feel like a rejection of that fundamental role. And for a society built on those foundations, well, that can feel pretty unsettling.
Okay, let's talk happiness then. We see all the curated stuff online, right? The
Mm.
perfect families, the blissful solo
The
trips.
highlight reels.
Totally. But what about that, like, raw, honest answer you give yourself late at night? Can a woman really build a truly fulfilling life without kids? Or is that happiness we see sometimes just a brave face, a shield?
Well, that gets to the heart of defining happiness itself, doesn't it? Whose definition are we even aiming for?
Good question.
Is it something genuinely internal, your own sense of contentment? Or is it more about getting that external nod, that validation? Socrates said, know thyself.
Mm-hmm.
So if your authentic self, the one you discover through that knowing, doesn't inherently crave motherhood, is a life lived true to that self somehow less valid?
It shouldn't be, but it often feels like it is. Which brings me to the whole biological clock thing.
Ah, yes, the clock.
Is it really biological? Or is it more like a cultural alarm clock, just blaring at us constantly, pushing us to conform, drowning out what we actually want,
That's a really powerful analogy. Think about social conditioning.
right?
From when they're little girls, women are often, steered towards seeing motherhood as central, this constant messaging.
Right.
It builds up this internal pressure that feels so real, so innate.
But maybe it's mostly external?
It could be, yeah, largely external, even if it feels internal.
I heard this story once about this incredible woman, like a real empire builder. Someone asked her about her legacy, who'd carry on her name.
Okay.
And she just said, my name isn't a burden to be carried, it's a monument.
Wow. That's powerful.
Isn't it? Just makes you wonder, who gets to decide what counts as legacy? Is it only about bloodlines?
Well, that directly challenges the traditional idea, doesn't it? Legacy as purely biological. It suggests legacy through impact, through creation, through the sheer force of what you do in the world.
Like building something lasting.
Exactly. It kind of echoes Nietzsche's idea of the will to power, that drive to create, to leave a mark. And that doesn't necessarily require having biological children.
So for anyone listening, when you think about your own feelings
Mm.
about having kids or not, maybe take a second. Try to peel back the layers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that desire or lack of it, is it really yours? Or is it just an echo Family pressure, society's expectations, that constant whisper of what you should want.
That kind of introspection is so crucial. Carl Jung talked about individuation, right?
Right.
Becoming your whole authentic self.
Yeah.
For a woman, maybe that process involves untangling her own genuine desires from all those collective messages about motherhood she's received. It's really about asking, what do I value? What brings me meaning?
It feels like.
Yeah.
They say it takes a village to raise a child.
Right, the famous proverb.
And that village often has some very strong opinions about who should be doing the raising. But maybe it takes a whole universe of courage for a woman to consciously say, no, that's not my path.
That takes immense inner strength.
To stand against that tide of shoulds and just declare, my life is complete right now on my own terms.
There's a profound truth in that. Going against the grain, especially on something society deems so fundamental,
Yeah.
yeah, that requires incredible strength. It's a real testament to autonomy, to self-determination.
Because for centuries, literally centuries, a woman's worth was tied to having kids. Her fertility was her value.
Absolutely. That link was explicit.
Have we really moved past that, truly? Or are we just sneakier about the judgment now, masking it with, like, concerned questions or those pitying looks?
Well, things have evolved, obviously. But those underlying beliefs, they can be incredibly persistent. Just think about the language we still use sometimes.
Subtle biases.
Yeah, subtle biases often baked into our cultural stories that keep linking a woman's fulfillment primarily to whether or not she's had children.
Okay, everyone listening, just stop for a second. Seriously, deep breath. Now ask yourself, what does happy actually mean to you? Like, stripped bare of all the scripts you were handed. Can you even picture it, feel it, without that default image of motherhood creeping in?
That exercise, defining it for yourself, is so important. It forces you to challenge your own assumptions, to question those external definitions of success and fulfillment. What comes up for you in that quiet moment?
Think about family gatherings. You see the childless women, right? Fielding the usual questions.
Yeah.
Still no kids? TikTok?
Or the inevitable questions.
And maybe you feel a little pang of pity for them, but hang on. How much of that pity is really for them, and how much is it just reflecting your own ingrained fears, your own conditioning?
That's a really sharp point.
What if they're not sad? What if you're just tired of everyone assuming they must be incomplete?
That discomfort we feel when faced with someone making different life choices. It often says more about us, about our own internal landscape, than about them. It pushes us to look at our own belief, the security we find in the status quo.
Okay, here's a stark choice then. Would you rather live a life surrounded by kids,
Yeah.
maybe secretly resent in those quiet, dark moments,
Oof.
or choose a child-free life, maybe dealing with the world's judgment, sure, but holding on to this deep, solid sense of contentment inside, which lie is easier to live with?
That dilemma really throws the cost of inauthenticity into sharp relief, doesn't it? Living a life that doesn't align with your core self, that can breed serious resentment no matter what path you take.
And baby showers. Amidst all the cute onesies and excitement, there's often someone, maybe a woman, with a slightly strained smile.
You see that sometimes.
Is it jealousy? Maybe, sometimes. But maybe it's also a kind of quiet mourning. Not regret, necessarily, but mourning for a different life, a path not taken, a freedom she chose, but that others just refuse to see or validate.
It's crucial to allow for that complexity of emotion, isn't it? What we see on the surface might not capture the whole picture. There can be a sort of quiet grief for possibilities, even when you're sure about your choice.
Oh, childlessness. Is it choice, circumstance, rebellion, loss, gain?
It could be any or all of those.
Exactly. It's this kaleidoscope of individual stories that just defies any easy label. And whose definition of a full life are we even using here? Yours, or the one society keeps pushing?
The real danger is trying to create these neat little boxes, applying this one-size-fits-all definition of what fulfillment looks like. Human experience just isn't like that. It's messy, diverse.
Yeah. Personally, I feel torn sometimes. The idea of that deep connection with a child, shaping a young mind, that's a powerful pull, really is.
It's a profound human experience, absolutely.
But then the sheer weight of that responsibility, the potential for this beautiful but maybe suffocating confinement, that feels, terrifying.
That internal conflict is incredibly common. So many people grapple with it. It just speaks to how complex our desires are and the fact that every major life path involves real trade-offs, recognizing potential joys and potential challenges.
My aunt, her whole world was her kids, for years. After they grew up and left, she once told me, kind of quietly, I don't know who I am without them.
Wow.
Was that fulfillment? Or was it a kind of subtle self-erasure, losing yourself in the role?
That really highlights the risk, doesn't it? Defining your entire identity through one single role, even one as significant as motherhood. When that role inevitably shifts or diminishes, it can leave a huge void, a feeling of being lost.
So here's maybe an unpopular truth. Choosing not to have kids.
Yeah.
That can actually be the most responsible decision, the most self-aware, even, dare I say, compassionate.
How so?
Compassionate to yourself, for sure, but also maybe to the world, and even to the hypothetical child, deep down, you couldn't embrace wholeheartedly.
That level of self-awareness is key for any big life decision, wouldn't you say? Recognizing your own limits, your desires, your capacity for different kinds of fulfillment, that's a sign of maturity, of responsibility.
We always praise the selfless mother, right? Put her on this impossible pedestal.
The archetype.
Yeah, but the selfish child-free woman, oof, that label still gets thrown around.
Yeah.
And it stings.
It does carry a heavy weight of judgment.
But what if that so-called selfishness is actually self-awareness? A woman knowing her boundaries, protecting her own energy, her well-being, making a conscious choice that ultimately affects everyone. Isn't that just profound self-respect?
Perhaps framing it as selfish versus selfless is the problem. Those terms are so loaded, often used just to police choices and enforce norms. Maybe it's more accurate to talk about, well, self-awareness and the courage to live authentically,
Yeah.
even when it bucks the trend.
Okay, another moment of honesty for everyone listening. Right now, have you ever judged a woman for not having kids? Thought she was too ambitious, too focused on herself? And have you also judged mothers for losing themselves, too wrapped up in parenting? If we do both, where does that leave any woman trying to figure out her own life?
It reveals those incredibly narrow, often contradictory expectations we place on women, doesn't it? It's like a classic double bind, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Any choice can be picked apart.
I heard this story. A woman dedicated her life to building schools in war zones, educated thousands of kids. Incredible impact.
Amazing legacy.
Right. At a funeral, someone leaned over and whispered, "Such a shame she never had children of her own."
Oh, wow. Even then.
Whose shame was that, really? Hers? Or the person whispering?
That anecdote just hits hard, doesn't it? It shows how deeply embedded that expectation of motherhood is. Sometimes it can completely overshadow truly remarkable achievements in other areas.
What if we just flip the script entirely?
What do you mean?
What if, for some women, choosing motherhood is actually the path of least resistance? Socially speaking, anyway.
Yeah.
It's the expected thing.
Okay, interesting.
And what if choosing to be child-free? What if that's the truly radical act? A bold defiance against a system that still, fundamentally, tries to define women by their biology.
That's definitely a provocative way to frame it. It challenges that default view of motherhood as the only or most natural path, and it reframes childlessness as a conscious, potentially even transformative choice.
You might tell yourself, I want a life of purpose beyond just family. I want to make my mark.
Ambition in other spheres.
Yeah. But is there still that little nagging fear deep down? That fear that whatever you achieve, it won't quite be seen as enough because you didn't tick the motherhood box.
That fear is completely understandable given how much societal emphasis there still is on women's reproductive roles, even if it's subtle. It takes real courage to define your own worth and purpose completely independently of those expectations.
Think about all those brilliant childless women throughout history. How many had their contributions minimized or just erased, often with that dismissive little addendum, well, she never had children?
Their legacies weren't empty at all.
Not at all. They were just written in a different language,
Yeah.
one that society hasn't always bothered to learn or value.
And it's so important we do learn to value them, to recognize and celebrate the diverse ways women have shaped the world, regardless of their reproductive choices. We need a much broader definition of legacy.
So maybe the question isn't really, can a woman be happy without kids? That feels too simple now, too loaded.
Right. It puts the burden of proof on the woman.
Exactly. Maybe the real question, the one that makes people squirm a bit, is, can society handle a woman who finds profound, unapologetic happiness entirely outside its prescribed maternal roles? Can you, listening, handle her?
That shift in focus is critical. It takes the spotlight off the individual woman's deficit and puts it onto the societal structures, the biases that shape how we even perceive female fulfillment. It really challenges us to check our own comfort levels with lives lived differently.
What about that deep urge some people feel, that thing we call maternal instinct? Is it innate? Yeah. What if it's not some purely biological imperative firing off? What if it's actually decades of relentless social conditioning,
Huh?
whispering then shouting
Yeah.
that motherhood is your primary route to value. How do you even start to untangle that?
Unpacking that kind of deep conditioning, it requires really critical self-reflection, a willingness to question beliefs you might have held your whole life about gender roles, about expectations. It's trying to discern what's truly your desire versus what you've been told you should desire.
Deep down, be honest.
Yeah?
Do you still harbor a belief, maybe unconsciously, that real true fulfillment for a woman comes packaged in one specific way?
The motherhood package.
Yeah. The one with tiny shoes, sleepless nights, that
Mhm.
that beautiful maybe surrender of self. Even if your brain rejects the idea, does that narrative still hold some power over your gut feeling?
Those deeply ingrained narratives are incredibly powerful. They can resist conscious change. It often takes ongoing awareness, a constant conscious effort to challenge them and redefine fulfillment for ourselves.
Let me just say this as clearly as I can. A woman's worth is not measured in heartbeats on an ultrasound.
Uh,
It's not determined by how many kids call her mom.
Here.
It's measured by the fierce, unapologetic pulse of her own damn life. Period. Remember that.
That's a powerful reclaiming of inherent value, isn't it? Completely independent of reproductive choices. It emphasizes self-definition, living authentically.
So let's loop back to that very first question. If the idea of happiness without kids felt like a betrayal, who are you really betraying?
Hmm.
Are you betraying your authentic self, your potential, your truth? Or are you just betraying a script someone else handed you?
Ultimately, that's the core question, isn't it? Are you living a life that aligns with your genuine values and desires, or are you living according to external pressures and expectations?
If any of this conversation has sparked something in you, if it resonates with something you felt but maybe couldn't articulate,
Yeah.
share it. Send this deep dive to that woman in your life who's just tired of justifying her choices, tired of feeling like she needs permission just to exist the way she is. Let her know she's not alone in feeling interrogated. What if? What if that yearning for a child or the pressure to have one? What if sometimes it's not purely about nurturing?
What else might it be about?
What if it's tapping into something deeper, more primal, like a desire for unconditional love from someone who hasn't learned to judge you yet, or disappoint you, or leave?
That's a really interesting psychological angle. Seeking a pure, uncomplicated love.
And regret, which potential regret feels heavier. Not having children you might have loved dearly,
Okay.
or having them, and secretly deep down resenting the constant performance of maternal bliss that's expected, that silent internal struggle. That feels like a profound burden to carry.
It does. The weight of living out of alignment with your true feelings.
We often treat a woman's choice to be child-free like it's, I don't know, a glitch in the system, an error in the code of womanhood, something that needs fixing.
Like it can't possibly be a valid, settled choice.
Exactly. Are you sure? Oh, you'll change your mind. As if her own mind isn't hers to know and govern.
That constant undermining of her autonomy.
Imagine a life just brimming with passion, purpose, art, adventure, love in all its forms, rich, deeply fulfilling.
A vibrant life.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then someone, often someone who barely knows you, asks, but aren't you lonely without kids? Just feel the stunning erasure in that one loaded question.
It dismisses everything else you just described. Everything that makes that life rich and full.
Take a quick mental inventory right now.
Yeah.
Think of the women you truly admire, the ones who inspire you.
Okay.
How many of them are primarily defined by their motherhood versus how many are defined by their actions, their work, their creations, their impact on the world beyond their family? It's interesting when you actually count, isn't it?
It forces you to examine the lens through which we typically view and value women's lives.
And that compliment, oh, you're so good with kids,
Usually meant kindly.
totally well-meaning. But
Mhm.
could it also be a subtle form of that societal expectation? A gentle nudge towards a role, like a gilded cage built with praise.
It can certainly feel that way sometimes, like it's reinforcing a specific script about where your natural talents should lead you.
There's this great story. A woman, maybe 38. Her doctor, a man, tells her she's running out of time.
The clock again.
You bet, her reply. For what, doctor? Your outdated version of my life or the one I'm actually busy living?
Mic drop, indeed. Perfect response.
Right. And what about the ethics? Bringing a child into this world which feels increasingly uncertain, fragile, just to satisfy an expectation or to quiet your own anxieties about legacy. Is that fair?
That's a profound ethical consideration that often gets overlooked in the pressure to procreate.
You might look at childless women and think they're somehow incomplete. missing a piece.
A common assumption.
But what if they're just whole in a different way? A way that doesn't require another human being, a child, to make them whole.
Whole into themselves, a complete configuration, just different.
And please, let's not fall into the trap of thinking nurturing and creation belong only to mothers.
It's absolutely not.
Those qualities. They live in compassionate human beings, period, regardless of kids. Love, the desire to build something meaningful that's not confined to the uterus, thank you very much.
It's a fundamental human capacity expressed in countless ways.
So ask yourself, who decided? Who decided a woman's primary legacy must be biological? Not experiential, not intellectual, not spiritual. Where did that decree come from?
Ancestors.
Our own fears. Or maybe,
Yeah.
just maybe, a patriarchal framework that still subtly shapes what we value.
It's worth tracing the roots of that assumption.
Here's a thought that kind of twisted my perspective lately. I used to think choosing childlessness was the radical feminist act.
Okay.
But now I think the truly radical, deeply ingrained belief is the demand that every woman must desire children to be seen as valid, as complete. That's the radical assumption we live under.
Flipping the script again. The pressure itself is the radical part.
A wise, childless woman once told me something like, "The world weeps over an empty womb, but it rarely stops to celebrate a woman's spirit that's been gloriously filled by other means."
That's beautiful. And sadly, often true.
So let's get brutally honest again. What future really scares you more? The one with the immense sacrifices that come with motherhood? Or the one without children, facing the potential judgment? Which fear has more control over your choices right now?
Facing that fear directly is powerful.
And that complicated feeling. Pregnancy announcements, baby showers, that bittersweet ache. It's not always envy. Sometimes it's just recognizing different paths diverging. It's a relatable wound for many.
Acknowledging that complexity is important.
Let's just be crystal clear. There is no single right way to be a woman. There's no universal blueprint for happiness. There are just different journeys, different ways to build a life that feels authentic to your soul, even if it doesn't fit neatly into society's boxes.
Authenticity over conformity.
Maybe you're not less of a woman if you don't have kids. Maybe you're not incomplete. Maybe you're just a different kind of powerful. A power born from self-creation, not procreation.
A power rooted in defining your own existence.
Imagine you had to choose right now.
Yeah.
The guaranteed all-consuming love of a child you might have, or the unwavering, unconditional love of yourself exactly as you are right now. Which void feels more terrifying to leave unfilled?
That's a deep identity question.
And the judgment, the external stuff, you can't really escape it until you silence the internal judge. Those pitying looks, the intrusive questions, they'll keep coming until you dismantle the belief inside yourself that you're somehow lacking. That inner critic, that's the real gatekeeper.
The internal work has to come first.
What if society actually genuinely celebrated child-free women? Their achievements, their choices, their contributions, as loudly and proudly as it celebrates mothers.
Imagine that world.
Would that biological clock still feel so deafening? Or would it finally quiet down to a manageable tick, or maybe even silence?
The cultural volume knob would certainly be turned down.
Here's a quiet truth, but maybe a powerful one. Your life's purpose. It isn't a mandate to populate the planet. It's an invitation.
An invitation.
To fully inhabit your own unique, unrepeatable existence. Children or no children, that invitation stands. Don't forget it.
That shifts the focus entirely from obligation to possibility.
Picture yourself way down the line looking back, your final years. What regret cuts deeper? The tutor you didn't have? Or the life you didn't dare live authentically because you were too scared to deviate from the script?
The regret of inauthenticity versus the regret of absence.
Maybe being a truly happy woman. Maybe it isn't about having all the answers figured out. Maybe it's simply about feeling free. Free from the constant need to justify your personal choices about children to anyone but yourself.
Freedom from external validation on this specific issue.
I'll confess, sometimes I catch these glimpses of phantom lives. The one with bedtime stories and scraped knees, and the other one with quiet mornings and just boundless freedom.
Both feel real.
Both feel real. Both carry their own weight of what-ifs. It's complex.
We're all just navigating this, aren't we? Mothers, the child-free, those longing for kids, those who feel totally ambivalent. The real burden isn't each other.
No.
It's the external pressures. It's the rigid definitions that try to shove everyone into neat little boxes. That's the shared struggle.
So remember that initial question about betrayal. The only real betrayal is living a life that isn't authentically yours. Full stop. Everything else is just noise, societal expectations.
Living true to yourself is the ultimate integrity.
So here's the bottom line. Again, a woman's body is her own. Her choices are her own. Her happiness is not contingent on her reproductive status. Period. End of story.
A fundamental truth.
Okay. Take a breath. If any of that felt like a lot, if it hit a nerve, that's okay. Maybe even good. Perhaps listen again later. Sometimes these things resonate even more deeply on a second hearing.
Let it sink in.
And if this deep dive gave voice to thoughts you've had, if it made you question things, please share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear these questions asked out loud. Someone who needs to feel less alone forging their own path.
Connection is key.
This has been The Deep Dive. We're not here to tell you what to think. Never. We're here to challenge why you think it and to encourage you, always, to find your own damn answers.